I was recently looking for vintage cameras and lenses at an antique mall, and I found this little guy. They were selling it for 12 bucks. It's a cheap plastic no-name prime lens. As you can see, it's missing the front nameplate, but I did figure out it is a 50mm lens, and it does go to f1.9, so it is pretty fast. And I also figured out it's a Pentax K-mount lens. So I think this might be a Chinon 50mm f1.9 auto Pentax K lens. I'm not 100% sure, but that is the closest I could get. So that's probably what it is. It could be something else. It could be another third-party lens, but this lens was only like 12 bucks, and I thought it would be worth picking up and trying out on my Sony camera. So like I said, this is a Pentax K-mount lens. So to mount it to my Sony a7 camera, I'm going to use our Photodiox Pentax K to Sony E-mount adapter. Mounting the lens on the adapter is super simple. Just going to line up the red mounting dot on the lens with the red mounting dot on the adapter. Place it together. There we go. Mounted on the Sony a7S II. This is my personal Sony full frame camera that I like to use. And we're just going to line up the red mounting dot on the adapter with the white mounting dot on the camera. There we go. Now we've got this super cheap, plasticky Pentax K-mount third-party lens adapted to our Sony full-frame camera with this Photodiox adapter. Now you might ask, how exactly do lens adapters work? How am I able to adapt this vintage lens to this modern digital camera? And the answer is focal flange distance. Basically, this lens was designed for a Pentax K-mount film SLR camera, and film SLRs require more space between where the film would go and where the lens mounted. They needed this extra space for the flappy mirror that would go up and down. And because these lenses require more space between where the optic mounts and where the film or sensor plane is, we've got extra space for a lens adapter. Now, this is just our standard Pentax K to Sony E adapter. We do make a bunch of different types of adapters with various functions. We have tilt shift adapters. We have adapters with built-in variable neutral density filters. We've got adapters with macro helicoids built in. So if you'd like to learn more about our adapters, click the link in the description below. Now, the reason I wanted to adapt this cheapo lens to this full frame camera is it is an f1.9 lens, so it is fairly fast, and I love shooting beautiful shallow depth of field bokeh photography with these vintage prime lenses. Even the cheap ones can get you some pretty beautiful results, and this lens was no exception. Mounting it on my Sony a7 II and taking it out and shooting in some beautiful summer locations, I got some pretty good results. One of the things with this lens is if we have the aperture open all the way, we will get fairly circular bokeh, but if we stop it down a little bit, you can see this lens does not have a lot of aperture blades. It only has 6 blades, and so you will get bokeh that has that octagonal look to it if you stop it down a little bit. And that's not the most pleasing bokeh out there, but I do actually kind of like having a weird shape to my bokeh sometimes. That's one of the things you get with cheaper lenses like this. You're not going to get that beautiful circular bokeh. It is going to have a little bit more of a shape to it. And that's just the nature of shooting with these types of lenses. I'm actually really pleased with the images I was able to capture with this super cheap lens. They're very beautiful shots. They do have a filmic look to them because these lenses tend to be softer than digital lenses, but I don't mind that. If I'm shooting shallow depth of field photography, I don't necessarily want it to be sharp. I kind of like that dreamy look. So for me, this lens did exactly what I wanted it to. Now, another type of photography I like to shoot is macro photography. And unfortunately, as you'll see here with this lens, the closest we can focus is 0.5 meters. That's not bad, but if I want to get closer macro detail, I'm going to have to modify this lens. And the way I'm going to do that is with a Photodiox macro extension tube. This is a Sony E-mount macro extension tube. It's designed to place between a Sony E-mount lens and a Sony E-mount camera. And by placing that extra space between the lens and camera, it will turn any Sony E lens into a macro lens. The lens will no longer be able to focus far away. It will no longer be able to focus to infinity, but it will be able to focus super close up. Now, this is our fully manual macro tube. This is designed to use with manual Cine Sony E lenses, but you can also use it with Sony E lens adapters, like this Pentax K to Sony E adapter. Basically, we're just going to take the lens and adapter off the camera, and we're going to mount the lens and adapter to the macro tube. And then we're gonna mount the macro tube to the camera. And now that we have this extra space between our lens and adapter and camera, this lens will no longer focus to infinity, but it will now focus super close up for beautiful macro shots. I was actually really surprised by the quality of macro photography I could shoot with this lens, adapter, and macro tube. Now, I didn't always use this full length of the tube. I did for some of my closer macro shots, some of the really small detail shots I wanted to capture, but there are other times where I didn't need as much macro extension, and so I actually modified the macro tube. I simply removed this larger piece of the tube, so get rid of that piece. And then I just made the tube smaller. You can actually pick how much extension you want. Mount that back on. And with this shorter macro extension tube, this lens wasn't cropping in as much. It wasn't able to focus as close, but it was better for larger subjects like flowers and larger insects. So I had this extra extension tube piece width, and I would add it in occasionally. But for a lot of these photos, I just used this shorter version of the macro tube. Now, this is kind of an odd lens demo video because, like I said, I'm not really sure what kind of lens this is. I think it's a Chinon 50mm f1.9, but I'm not 100% sure. If you think you know what this lens is, comment below. I'd love to hear what you think it is. And also, click the links in the description below if you'd like to learn more about any of the gear featured in today's video, our Pentax K to Sony E adapter, our Photodiox macro extension tubes. And if you don't want to adapt a Pentax K lens to your camera, if you want to adapt a different type of lens, or if you have a different camera, we have an entire massive line of lens adapters for various mirrorless and DSLR lenses, as well as all sorts of lenses, be they full frame, APS-C, medium format, micro four thirds. We've got you covered. Whatever kind of lens you have, odds are we've got a lens adapter that will help you adapt it to your camera. So click the link in the description below to learn more about our lens adapters, and comment below if you have any questions or comments. I'd love to talk to you. Also, click right here to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more videos just like this one. I'm Sean with Photodiox.com, and have fun shooting with obscure, cheap manual lenses.